ChatGPT said. The chamber of the alien warlords thundered with cruel amusement, their serrated voices overlapping as if savoring a meal rather than conducting a ritual of power. At the center of the platform stood a single human, restrained by energy bonds, battered but upright. The execution was not a matter of justice, nor of military necessity. It was a spectacle, a declaration to the galaxy that resistance against the warlords carried only one conclusion. The victim was not anonymous. He was chosen precisely because he symbolized Earth's presence among the stars, a representative who had dared to question alien dominance. To kill him was to kill the very idea of human defiance. Every lens in the hall was fixed on his figure. The broadcast carried across hundreds of systems, flickering on market walls, taverns, and military installations. Audiences of alien species leaned in, some with curiosity, others with excitement, waiting to witness the humiliation of a people still considered newcomers to interstellar politics. It was intended as a warning to weaker civilizations, a reminder that the galaxy was governed by predators, not dreamers. Yet the man refused to tremble. His uniform was torn, his face bruised, but his eyes carried a strange steadiness, unyielding even under the glares of armored guards. The warlord who presided, a towering figure with blade-like mandibles, leaned forward to mock him, announcing to the audience that humanity was nothing more than fragile flesh wrapped in arrogance. The hall erupted with jeers, a chorus of contempt that should have broken the spirit of any captive. Instead, the human straightened his shoulders, forcing his body upright despite the pain. His voice cut through the uproar, steady and sharp. He did not beg, did not apologize, did not curse. He simply reminded them that the measure of a people was not taken at the moment of execution, but at the hour of retaliation. The chamber fell into a brief silence, discomfort crawling into the edges of the crowd. Some warlords sneered to cover their unease. Others chuckled nervously, brushing it away as empty bravado. But those who studied human history knew the weight of such words. Humanity's legacy was one of surviving extinction after extinction, of building empires from ashes, of carrying grudges across generations. That flicker of awareness was drowned by the roar of alien amusement as the order was given. Energy flared, light engulfed the human, and his body crumpled in a flash of finality. The audience cheered. To the warlords the message was clear: a species had been shamed, a symbol destroyed, a lesson taught. Across the stars, many alien races accepted the performance at face value, seeing only the execution of a defiant but overmatched opponent. They laughed at the idea that Earth could answer such a blow. But in living rooms, bunkers, and command centers back on Earth, the moment landed differently. Silence descended, not of despair, but of something far heavier. Families watching the broadcast clenched their fists. Generals and admirals in hidden bases stared at the image until the screen went black, recording every detail of the act. Political leaders did not issue statements or appeals to interstellar law. They did not convene councils to demand reparations. They did nothing visible at all. Instead, they absorbed the insult in silence, their restraint masking the storm gathering beneath. The warlords mistook this silence for weakness. They declared victory before the galaxy, mocking Earth's supposed fragility, claiming that humans were incapable of striking back. Their analysts assured them that Earth possessed only fledgling fleets, insufficient technology, and limited reach. To the arrogant, it was the end of the matter. To humanity, it was the beginning of something else. The executed man's final words echoed in the minds of those who had listened carefully. His death was not a closing act but an invocation. The galaxy saw life extinguished. Earth saw a spark lit. No proclamations, no threats, no outbursts followed the spectacle. Only the quiet certainty that what had been taken would be avenged. And while the galaxy laughed, humanity began to prepare, coldly, methodically, without a shred of mercy for what would come next. The galaxy reacted with the arrogance of victors, repeating the spectacle of the human's death across their networks as if replaying a trophy kill. Commentators called Earth a curiosity that had reached beyond its cradle too soon. Rival species placed bets on how long it would take before humans submitted and accepted protectorate status under one of the dominant powers. Merchants speculated that trade lanes through Seoul would be abandoned, and smugglers whispered that human colonies could be plundered without consequence. Every laugh, every prediction, every dismissal carried the same assumption, that silence meant surrender. On Earth, however, silence was the chosen mask. Governments issued no condemnations. Media channels did not show grief-stricken anchors or protests filling the streets. Instead, a strange unity emerged, one born not of chaos but of calculation. Civilian networks broadcast routine content, keeping the population calm, while behind those walls of normalcy, the heart of humanity turned toward war. Generals summoned long-retired officers to locked rooms. Scientists disappeared from universities and research facilities, their projects suddenly redirected to places without names. Supply convoys were rerouted at night toward sealed launch pads. The noise of daily life continued on the surface, but beneath it, the world shifted its weight like a predator coiling to strike. The alien empires mistook the absence of noise for paralysis. They did not see the drills carried out in subterranean bases where soldiers ran endless exercises with the efficiency of machines. They did not witness the armadas docked under orbital shadows, stripped of insignia, painted in black hulls that absorbed more than light. They absorbed identity. In the silence, shipyards ran without pause, welding steel and composites into forms that few outside Earth had ever catalogued. Entire divisions vanished from public records, as if they had been erased, but in reality they were being folded into a plan forged long before this insult had occurred. Centuries of surviving on a world that demanded resilience had taught humanity the art of patience. The strategy was not rage-filled bluster but controlled, deliberate preparation. Analysts mapped every alien trade route, every fueling station, every point of weakness where the arrogance of the warlords had led them to neglect vigilance. Linguists monitored intercepted transmissions to measure the mood of enemy crews. Psychologists advised tacticians on how fear spread fastest among hierarchical species and used to facing an enemy that refused to play by established rules. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. The name that passed through the command networks of Earth was never spoken on open channels. It was carried only in encrypted bursts, whispered in secure halls, etched into directives sealed with layers of secrecy. They called it the Reaper. Not a weapon in the conventional sense, but the embodiment of a doctrine. It symbolized the promise that the insult would not merely be avenged but carved into the memory of every species that had cheered during the execution. To invoke that name was to remind every operative, every strategist, every soldier that their mission was not conquest, nor diplomacy, nor deterrence. It was judgment. The first signs of preparation filtered into the galaxy in ways too subtle to raise alarms. Mining operations on remote moons ceased shipping to civilian markets, their cargoes redirected to unknown destinations. Communications with human colonies grew irregular, as if routine life had been suspended. Merchant fleets noticed less traffic from Earth's ports, assuming economic weakness rather than calculated withdrawal. No one suspected that these were the early stages of a campaign designed to unfold without warning. Patience defined the waiting. Where other civilizations might have rushed to retaliate, humanity understood the value of timing. Rage was useless if it arrived unprepared. Vengeance mattered only if it shattered not a single fleet or a single empire, but the very certainty that the warlord's arrogance represented. And so the planet held its silence, watched its enemies laugh, and sharpened its blades in the dark. The Reaper was not yet unleashed, but its shadow had already begun to stretch. The first disappearance went unnoticed. A small alien relay station on the frontier ceased transmitting, its signal cut off without distress or warning. By the time a scout vessel arrived to investigate, nothing remained but drifting debris, the wreckage so precise it looked like the work of surgical instruments rather than an explosion. The report was filed, shrugged off as a mishap, and buried under bureaucratic indifference. Yet in the following weeks, more outposts fell silent, scattered across different sectors, each vanishing without survivors, without distress calls, without any clue to identify the assailant. Rumors spread through the ranks of alien fleets. Patrol ships began to report ghostly contacts on their sensors, flickers of movement, shadows where no object should be, signatures that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Crews whispered about a vessel that struck like lightning, leaving no time to respond, its arrival heralded by silence rather than alarms. When fragments of testimony leaked from half-mad survivors, a single image recurred, a black warship whose hull seemed to swallow starlight, marked by the symbol of a crimson scythe. They called it the Reaper. At first, commanders dismissed these accounts as superstition born of fear. But then, convoys began disappearing entirely. Supply lines once thought untouchable were reduced to wreckage scattered across void. Fleets sent to investigate returned with fewer ships than they launched, their officers shaken, their crews broken by encounters they could scarcely describe. The Reaper never engaged in drawn-out battles. It struck from nowhere, dismantled its targets with impossible precision, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. Against it, alien tactics collapsed, because every strategy relied on overwhelming strength, on the assumption that enemies could be crushed under superior firepower. Humanity's weapon ignored those rules, striking at weak points, exploiting blind spots, and retreating before brute force could react. What unsettled the galaxy most was the psychological warfare. The Reaper left messages, not in language but in execution. Disabled ships were found with their reactors intact but crews missing, entire vessels abandoned in the dark, their logs intact up to the moment a human boarding party arrived. Transmissions were intercepted where alien officers begged their superiors for help, only to be cut off by a voice repeating the last words of the executed human whose death had started it all. Every ambush became a reminder that humanity had not forgotten, and that vengeance was being carried out with meticulous patience. The warlords who had once mocked Earth now faced growing panic within their ranks. They convened emergency councils, bringing together fleets larger than some empires had ever assembled, yet still the Reaper struck with impunity. It never attacked the core of their power, not yet. Instead, it dismantled their confidence piece by piece, bleeding them where they felt strongest. Trade routes collapsed as merchants refused to travel without massive escorts. Outlying colonies declared neutrality, fearing the Reaper's wrath more than the commands of their overlords. Even hardened soldiers began to desert, whispering that no defense could stand against an enemy that moved unseen, killed without hesitation, and always escaped. The brilliance of the campaign lay in its restraint. Humanity did not flood the stars with fleets or announce declarations of war. They let the Reaper speak for them, one strike at a time, each encounter more chilling than the last. The galaxy began to realize that this was not an act of desperation, but a demonstration. Earth had chosen its moment and weapon with ruthless clarity, sending a message more powerful than fleets or armies: if you harmed one of us, none of you would ever feel safe again. The warlords had meant to show that a single human life was worthless. Instead, that death had summoned something they could not predict or contain. By the time they accepted the Reaper was real, it was already too late. Humanity's shadow moved freely among their borders, and the galaxy understood that a predator unlike any it had faced before had finally revealed its fangs. The warlords could no longer dismiss the threat as isolated incidents. Entire sectors trembled under the weight of growing losses, fleets of staggering size gathered in desperation, and yet the same pattern repeated. Wherever the Reaper struck, order unraveled. A coalition of alien powers, once divided by rivalry, now attempted unity for survival. Massive armadas assembled, their hulls gleaming under starlight, confident that overwhelming numbers would corner and destroy a single phantom ship. What they did not understand was that the Reaper was never meant to fight alone. It was the herald of a doctrine, the spearhead of a force the galaxy had underestimated for too long. When the coalition fleets converged, they expected a frontal confrontation. Instead, communications fractured. Sensor networks collapsed under waves of electronic disruption. Precision strikes dismantled command ships in seconds, leaving hundreds of vessels leaderless. Human fleets emerged from the void with discipline alien empires had never mastered, coordinating as though each vessel shared a single mind. Their maneuvers were not designed to showcase strength but to exploit every weakness in the coalition's overconfidence. For every 100 ships deployed against them, humans destroyed the ones that mattered most: carriers, supply barges, communications hubs. Within hours, fleets of thousands found themselves drifting, starved of fuel, blind and deaf to orders. The psychological campaign deepened. Every intercepted broadcast carried the same haunting refrain, the executed human's final words repeated in the voice of those who delivered vengeance. It was not rage but a cold reminder that Earth had not forgotten. Alien commanders, unaccustomed to enemies who wielded memory as a weapon, faltered. Morale collapsed faster than fleets could retreat. Entire squadrons fled before combat began, unwilling to face the shadow of a warship they had never seen and could never catch. Fear spread faster than destruction, until entire colonies surrendered without a shot, raising human banners rather than risk annihilation. The warlords raged in their fortresses, demanding loyalty, executing deserters, and calling for punishments against any system that wavered. But these gestures only exposed their weakness. Populations that had once bowed in obedience realized their masters could not protect them. Rebellion ignited in scattered corners of their territories, uprisings sparked by whispers that the Reaper punished only those who stood against Earth. What had begun as vengeance became a reshaping of power, with humanity's presence forcing empires centuries old to fracture under their own fear. What unsettled the galaxy most was humanity's refusal to gloat or proclaim dominance. No speeches accompanied victories, no declarations of conquest filled the networks. Only silence followed the devastation, silence more terrifying than any threat. This absence of propaganda made it clear the campaign was not about prestige or territorial ambition. It was about punishment, measured and absolute. The warlords had turned a man's death into spectacle. Humanity had turned that spectacle into a promise of retribution, and they delivered it without hesitation. As weeks stretched into months, the coalition that once mocked Earth fell apart entirely. Former allies accused one another of treachery, convinced their neighbors were secretly feeding information to humans in exchange for survival. Treaties collapsed, suspicion poisoned every interaction, and where once alien powers laughed at humanity's insignificance, they now whispered of Earth with dread. To resist was to invite destruction. To submit was the only chance at survival. The legend of the Reaper spread beyond the truth of its missions. Tales grew of entire fleets vanishing at the sight of its crimson scythe, of commanders abandoning their posts before the battle even began. Whether myth or fact, the impact was the same. Humanity had transformed fear into a weapon sharper than any blade. The warlords who believed execution secured obedience discovered too late that they had only forged their own downfall. The galaxy now looked toward Earth not with contempt but with a mixture of awe and terror. The message was unmistakable. When a single human was taken, the cost was collapse. Humanity had not simply answered the insult. It had rewritten the balance of power in silence, leaving the old order gasping in the ruins of its arrogance. The warlords had built their rule on fear, and now they found themselves drowning in it. Their fleets scattered, their colonies wavered, and the unity they had forced on lesser species crumbled under the pressure of relentless strikes. Still, they clung to arrogance, certain that hiding behind fortress worlds would shield them from the judgment they had invited. But Earth had no interest in their fortifications or their excuses. The demand was simple and absolute: surrender the architects of the execution. No bargaining, no compromise. Deliver the guilty or face extinction. They refused. Pride bound them more tightly than chains, and so their fate was sealed. The Reaper emerged at the edge of their capital system without fanfare, followed by fleets that bore no colors, no declarations, only the cold precision of ships that had come for justice. The defenders hurled thousands of vessels into its path, but within hours their formations dissolved. Communications failed, supply ships vanished, and command cruisers were torn apart with mechanical efficiency. It was not a battle, it was a dissection. Each defensive layer peeled back, each fortress silenced in turn, until the world that had once hosted the spectacle of a human's death lay exposed and trembling. On the surface, panic overtook the population that had cheered so loudly during the execution. The same plazas where warlords had mocked humanity now filled with terrified citizens watching the skies burn. The ruling caste retreated into their citadel, convinced that even if their fleets failed, their walls would stand. But when the Reaper descended through the atmosphere, unopposed and unstoppable, their illusions shattered. The citadel's defenses flickered, collapsed, and doors once thought impenetrable opened as if cut by invisible blades. The warlords were dragged from their sanctuaries, stripped not only of their power but of the aura of invincibility they had worn for centuries. Bound and broken, they were transported not to Earth, but to the very chamber where the human they had executed had fallen. Before a galaxy that had once laughed at humanity, the roles were reversed. There were no speeches of gloating, no boasts of victory. A broadcast began, silent but unmistakable, showing the condemned figures kneeling in the same place where a human life had been ended in mockery. Justice was swift. Each warlord who had ordered the killing met the same fate, their deaths recorded and transmitted across the stars. The difference was unmistakable. Where the warlords had staged cruelty for amusement, Earth carried out judgment with the cold finality of a sentence passed. No spectacle, no celebration, only the simple truth that actions carried consequences. The galaxy watched in silence as the once feared rulers crumpled one by one, realizing too late that they had awakened a force they either understood nor could ever again provoke without cost. When the last execution ended, the broadcast cut to black. No declaration followed, no demand for tribute or territory. Humanity withdrew its fleets as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the memory of what had been done. The Reaper vanished into legend, its symbol burned into the minds of every commander, merchant, and civilian who had witnessed the collapse of empires. Fear of Earth no longer rested on speculation but on the undeniable evidence that retaliation would come, inevitable and unstoppable, should another insult ever be attempted. For humanity, the campaign was never about conquest. It was about balance, about engraving into galactic history the understanding that a single human life held value beyond calculation. The warlords had mocked that idea and paid with their civilizations. From that day forward, when lesser species spoke of humans, they did so with reverence edged by terror. And when children of distant worlds asked their elders why the stars grew quiet at the mention of Earth, they were told of the time a human was killed, and the Reaper answered,